And we're live. All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to Wolf. Happy Monday. I'm stoked to be joined here by Darkside. You guys know him well from X. He just informed me he just came from the spaces, and so coming straight over from X, probably talking Bitcoin. And I wanted to come on and do a podcast together, answer some questions that I think need to be talked about. Obviously, they're talked about on spaces, but on stream, I figured we could clip these, we can have them on the content, and we can have these content sort of circulating, especially as Bitcoin becomes more and more of a conversation, as investors come in. I want to make sure, Darkside is one of the best speakers I've ever heard for investing, especially Bitcoin. I want to make sure we get some of that stuff here. And so he's also a great person. And so I'm really excited to chat with you, Darkside. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Kate. Thanks for the kind words.
Absolutely. So, okay, to start us off, most people are going to be pretty aware of who you are, or at the very least, they've seen you, yapping with people on spaces, going back and forth on Bitcoin stuff. If you could give me like the background info, just like a minute or two, just a little bit of background on who you are, where you came from, why so many people like me are always having you coming back on our spaces. What is it about your career and your experiences that people want to hear more of?
So I'm not sure why, but I did a 25-year sentence on Wall Street. I started in the late 80s, not to date myself, on the floor of the Philadelphia Options Exchange. I'm an options trader by nature, so I think I have a different perspective when it comes to risk. Moved out to San Francisco, traded out on the Peak Coast, eventually landed in Chicago, trading on the floor of the CBOE. I left the floor to start Dash Financial. So Dash was a options execution house. I developed algorithms. I'm a technologist at heart. And we built options algorithms to make trading the option space better for the customer, to return agency to Wall Street. And as many of you know that when I started in the business, there were 4 options exchanges. When we started to build Dash, there were 14. And you have to ask yourself, well, why are there 14 options exchanges? And the answer is because the brokers created a obfuscation mechanism to capture fees, right? Where was it cheapest to trade? According to the SEC, the best price rule says if an option trades on one exchange at $1 and it trades at another exchange at $1, well, then that's the same, that they're the same. But the reality is one exchange pays a credit for trading on that exchange. The other one charges you a debit, and that difference is significant when done at scale. So at Dash, we set out to solve that problem by routing options based on the best net price instead of the best execution rule. And of course, that gained tremendous traction. I think Dash today is one of the largest options execution house on Wall Street. I was proud to be the founding CEO and build that. We were a self-clearing broker-dealer. So I dealt with being the CEO of a self-clearing broker-dealer, member of the OCC, member of the DTCC. I learned a lot about how the grease in the engine turns, right? So I think I have a really deep understanding, not just of surface TradFi issues, but actually the plumbing of the system. In 2013, I read the white paper on a flight to Spain. I think you've heard this story, I know. So I'm on a flight to Spain to meet with our clients at Banco Santander. We were going to a Real Madrid-Barcelona football game.
Crazy.
And I read this white paper. I read it about 8 times, landed on the ground in Spain, downloaded an app called Local Bitcoins, met a random Spaniard behind the hotel in Madrid, took out 500 euro from the ATM. That's all they'd let me take out. And I became a Bitcoiner within 8 hours of reading the white paper. And sort of the story kind of flows from there. But I got real into distributed ledger technologies, started a cybersecurity firm by the name of Alter Software Solutions, founding CEO there. And I think we secured about 17 patents, foundational in storing data into Merkle trees, distributed ledgers. I don't call them blockchains because they're not. Did a lot of work in the space. Retired in 2019. Been on the road in an RV with my wife. I know you, Kate, you've met Mrs. Lightside. And
Lightside, I love that.
Yeah, she is at Lightside 2030 _. Give her a
follow.
What?
Wait, I didn't know that. Okay, we gotta run this page up. That's funny. Okay, let's go.
For sure. So we spent the next 5 years really securing my populist roots. Right. I wanted to really get out of the coastal elites, out of the Wall Street world, and just meet Americans. And it was a tremendously eye-opening experience. When I was 16 years old, Kate, I rode a bicycle from Seattle to New York. I don't know if you know this story.
What?
Yeah, when I was 16, I rode a bicycle from
Wow.
Seattle to New York, and I wanted to recreate that trip. I had such amazing memories. It was the summer of 1984. Now I really have dated myself, but it was the Summer Olympics in LA, and it was an incredible time in America. And I remembered all of these vibrant little towns all over the United States, from Seattle to New York. So I told my wife, I said, let's take the RV and let's recreate the trip. And this is 2019 that we started, and it was just a heart-crushing experience. All of these small towns that I loved were now nothing more than a Dollar General and maybe a Family Dollar and a lot of methamphetamine. And nobody came outside. Back when I was on my bike trip, everybody was coming out. They had single A baseball teams, all kinds of, it was just fun. And all of these little towns that I remembered so fondly had been destroyed by what I know to be a broken money system, right? The Federal Reserve, inflation, just the absolute destruction of middle America. And that really propelled me down my Bitcoin path. I'd already been on the path, but man, I now looked at Bitcoin as something that could save the country or save the world, as opposed to a number go up, way of getting rich. So yeah, it was tremendously inspirational to understand what Bitcoin is and what it offers us in comparison to the current system, a fiat system, based on inflation, money printing, and whoever's closest to the printer gets the wealthiest.
Wow. Okay, that was okay. A couple things, two things. One, I put the stream link in the private chat on the right side. Second thing was something you said there, especially. I think you actually had told me that actually a while ago. That I think about it, but because I had told you about the story where I jumped in the car and I had driven across the country the other direction. But one thing I noticed, and it was no doubt from our spaces, and I don't agree with the term doomer, which I think we'll bring up at some point here, just because I think it needs to be addressed. I think there might be a word, but I don't think that's accurate at all. And Thomas puts it well. He's like, wait, hold on, talking about our problems is doomer. So, anyways, we'll get to that in a second. But I had been, I've lived online for the last couple of years. I've done 99% of my time has been probably online because I've been building in the space and all that. So I'm not like going out to the mall on Saturday. I'm not going through stores and. So anyways, I like recently I did, and like I had a whole day where I was just out and I was just going on these stores. I just remember being like, half of the stores were empty. The other half were like the paint is flying, and like everything just looked like broke. And I remember, and I don't know if it's because Andrew Tate's been on my timeline or something. He's yelling at everyone saying, you need to make more money, stop being a brokey. Maybe it's that. But I looked around and I just saw so many people, and they're just like, I saw someone in the checkouts and they put back like a pack of candy because they couldn't afford like the $3. And I was just kind of like, we've gotten so weird in this online world where there's just money just pops up out of nowhere. A company, raises $14 million. So it blew my mind, and it really started to open up the idea that you brought up recently, which is, hey, there's a lot of paper Bitcoin and a lot of derivatives trading out. I actually know a lot about this world, and there's not that many people who know it as deeply as maybe they're putting on. So there's been a lot of debate around whether or not there even is paper Bitcoin, and then the conversation of, is there true value having it under cold storage? And that was kind of like the main thing that my brain was starting to slowly come across. I'm starting to see why the self-custody folks are so gung-ho about it, when I always understood it. But I think recently it really started to click with me. And I was like, okay, I think Darkside's really starting to get through here, because now I'm starting to see why he's getting so loud, and gets even louder when he gets pushed back.
Yeah, look, the paper Bitcoin world has exploded. The derivatives complex built around Bitcoin is absolutely exploding. And there's really, look, you have to ask the question of yourself, what is Bitcoin, right? Is Bitcoin at Coinbase? Is that Bitcoin? Well, no, it's an IOU. You have an IOU from Coinbase. Is Bitcoin held by MicroStrategy? Is that Bitcoin? No, that's an IOU from your broker dealer that you own shares in MicroStrategy. Your broker dealer has an IOU on the DTCC, and the DTCC holds your shares in MicroStrategy. And then does MicroStrategy themselves hold Bitcoin? Well, no, they have an IOU from a custodian. That could be Coinbase, Fidelity, maybe others. So what is Bitcoin, right? Well, to me, Bitcoin means that you hold your keys, you hold your coins, and they live outside of any financial system, right? That's the promise of Bitcoin, is that you get to be your own bank. What we've seen now is the explosion of perps, perpetual futures to trade on exchanges. We have COMEX cash settled futures. We have IBIT and its very large derivatives complex that surrounds IBIT. The paper Bitcoin market has exploded. And what's unfortunate about that is Bitcoin is a scarce asset. There will only be ever 21 million Bitcoin created. However, in the paper Bitcoin market, I think it's fair to estimate that over the last several years, we've created an additional 5 million Bitcoin. So where is this all headed? Well, any derivatives complex requires that the underlying asset, in this case Bitcoin, be freely available for borrow and loan. And it's not, right? Bitcoin is not freely available for borrow and loan. It's very difficult to borrow. It's expensive, and people don't want to loan their Bitcoin. And what little Bitcoin there is that's in the hypothecation market, right, is not enough to meet the obligations of the derivatives complex that's been built around it. So where are we headed? We're headed for a problem, right? This is going to blow up at some point. What will happen? The Bitcoin perpetual futures will dislocate from the spot price of Bitcoin, right? I've asked this question many times. What happens when treasury companies claim to own 22 million Bitcoin, right? Well, we know they can't own 22 million Bitcoin, right? What happens when you add up all of the Bitcoin claimed by
Oh man, wait, I didn't even think about that.
ETFs, treasury companies, potentially governments, right? We are going to get to a point where there's more than 22 million Bitcoin claimed, and that will be the end of the paper Bitcoin market.
Okay, wow. I had not, for some reason, that last 30-second bit, I had not caught ever. I had not heard you mention that part of it. So, oh wow. Okay, now that's like extra making sense. I knew why you were already on it, but okay, yeah. What does happen? Okay, that because one of my questions is this, and I think it might be a good sort of bridge as well. So, I had very recently watched a bunch. I don't know why YouTube recommended it, but I'm watching all these videos. Like, hey, what did the '08 feel like? What were the news channels like? And I started watching all of them. And I was just like mind blown. I'm hearing a lot of the same conversations. Oh, no, we're global markets now. Because of this. 3 days later, the whole market's done. So in the scenario that you just laid out, if we do end up in a scenario where there's more Bitcoin out there and we're like, okay, something's wrong, what happens in that scenario? What does it feel like? And also, is there any distinctions? Do you draw that moment to an '08 draw, or is there something else that would kind of cause that type of cascade?
Yeah, that's a great question, Cade. So look, I don't have a crystal ball, but I can tell you, having lived through '08, '09, been trading during that time period, not just '08, '09, we can go back to long-term capital management in the 90s, the Tide bot explosion, the Russian default, the internet bubble of 2000, '08, '09, like these financial crises, it's like the old story about the 1 in 100-year flood that happens every 8 years.
Yeah.
Look, there's one thing you can absolutely guarantee yourself: there will be a next financial crisis. Now, I think the important question to ask yourself is what would have happened in '08, '09 had Bitcoin existed? I think about this an awful lot. I remember being on the floor. Floor traders were going to the bank, taking hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash out of the bank and putting it in their mom's freezer. But ask yourself, why were they doing that? Well, they were doing that because when Bear Stearns failed and then eventually Lehman failed, right? Well, what was the guarantee that your bank wasn't going to fail? And if your bank failed, what were you going to get back? And if all the banks failed, well, certainly you weren't going to get back anything. So in a financial crisis, especially now that we have sort of a centralized financial system, in as much as the big banks have really taken over, there really aren't as many community banks or small banks as there were even back then. What would happen if, let's say, a Societe Generale or a UBS or a Sumitomo Bank, right? Whether it's Japan or Europe, if they fail because of the quadrillion dollars and that's right, quadrillion. I don't even know what a quadrillion is, but I'll use the number because that's been estimated as to how large the derivatives complex is.
Yes.
Well, if they're to fail, then how does Goldman Sachs survive? How does Citigroup survive? How do all of the banks, because the Western financial system, step back. I think it's important to recognize that the Western financial system, whether we're talking about the Fed, the ECB, the Bank of Japan, the Swiss National Bank, all of these central banks are tied together through the Bank of International Settlements, right? And they all have counterparty exposure to each other, right? They're like reinsurance companies for each other.
Yeah,
and they all reinsure each other's risk by taking parts of transactions that are too big for them to handle. So can Citibank and Goldman Sachs survive the failure of UBS? No. They can't. We saw that when Credit Suisse went down. The system immediately got together and said, okay, UBS, you're buying Credit Suisse. You're taking it over because they can't let it fail, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the next financial crisis, we're going to see a scenario, and I asked this question earlier, what would have happened in 08, 09 had Bitcoin existed? Well, I can tell you that every large player would have immediately bought Bitcoin and self-custodied it, taken it out of the financial rails. But that comes with a real consequence, which is that what little Bitcoin there is available to be borrowed and loaned would be sucked out of the system. So what would happen to the derivative markets surrounding Bitcoin if you had this rush, essentially a modern day bank run, where people pull their money out of the bank, they buy Bitcoin and they self-custody it, and they do all of this within an hour? Because you can take delivery of Bitcoin in under an hour, right? Well, guess what? I mean, you're setting up a witch's brew of an absolute catastrophic bank run, the likes of which we've never seen. And then I would also explain to you that whether you're talking about Millennium Partners or Renaissance or any of the largest hedge funds in the world, rest assured that they have game planned this very scenario. They have accounts at foreign exchanges, right? Because the first thing the US will do, and the Western banking system for that matter, is they will shut down withdrawals from all exchanges, right? They may even shut off the buy button as they did in GameStop. But you can't shut off the buy button at Bybit or in Dubai or Singapore, or right? This is a global product, and we're talking about global entities that have billions, if not trillions of dollars combined in the Cayman Islands, in Singapore, all over, in Dubai, all over the world. So we have kind of put together a scenario by which you have modern day bank runs that are triggered by the existence of Bitcoin. And had Bitcoin existed in 08, 09, you can bet this would have been the off ramp from the financial system.
Well, what did it? I feel like it would be the worst feeling of all time to feel like, I mean, you're talking about these guys walking over and pulling out their net worth in cash and sticking it in the freezer.
Yeah.
Where were you? What were you thinking? And during, I mean, where were you? Were you also? Were you like stuffing cash in the freezer? Like, where were you at with all this?
Well, I'll tell you what. It's kind of interesting. I was a gold and silver bug long before there was Bitcoin.
Oh, okay,
So
okay, right.
Coming out of long-term capital management, I said to my wife, I said, you know what? I don't want to ever own a stock. I'm a trader. If stocks go up, I'm going to make plenty of money. And I really believe in gold and silver, right? And I started buying gold and silver and just stacking it. And you know, that was my exit plan was always that I never trusted the financial system. And this was when I was a young trader, right? Long before ever getting involved in sort of the plumbing of the markets. I was just naturally, I lacked trust in the institutions. That's probably a common theme amongst Bitcoiners. But yeah, so I had stacked gold and silver. I was prepared for any eventuality. Personally, I wasn't freaking out. Yeah, today's a different story, right? It's a different world today than even in 08, 09. And remember, that was less than 15 years ago. So
yeah. And that was one of the points I had brought up in a space like a week ago. It was something you had said, and I double tagged on it because I was like, wait a minute. Did anyone hear that? You were like, hey, I don't know why you guys think this is like so far in the future. 08 was like what do you mean? Like 2008. It was right there. Like, what are you talking about? No, in my head, it was just mind blowing. So I was like, wait, how long have the markets even been how long have we even had cash? And that's where you really start to go down the rabbit hole. You know, for me, like a year ago when I was like, wait, okay, so where did our money come from? Did the government make it? Who is Jekyll Island? Like all these questions around these things. And so one of the things that you've talked about a lot is the Fed. I would say you don't even talk about it much on the spaces because most of the time you're like, honestly, not even worth talking about. Powell says something, you're like, it is what it is. You know, the system's still, I have the same thoughts, but for people who are new and they hear everyone talking about the Fed, they hear the CIA, all these 3-letter words and stuff. How would you describe the Fed and why is this such a hot topic of debate in our spaces and our conversations, you think, especially in Bitcoin?
Well, let's go back to my bicycle trip, right? 1984, we had less than $1 trillion of debt in the United States. We had just come off the gold standard in 1971. kind of an interesting parallel, about the same amount of time between '08 and today. Fast forward, right, by '08, '09, that's numbers up to, I think, a 7, 8 trillion. Today, 37 trillion. So that's just pure money creation. The Fed is neither federal nor is it a reserve. It's a private bank. It's held by its shareholders. It pays a 6% dividend to its shareholders. So they have a lot of incentive to print money and to create a Ponzi scheme. And then what we are seeing today is the result of a debt-based fiat Ponzi scheme that, in my personal opinion, is getting closer to the end. And when Ponzi schemes break, as we saw with Bernie Madoff, and let's remember, Bernie Madoff was, I think, the chairman of NASDAQ. He certainly was the creator of payment for order flow. Most people don't know that. Payment for order flow, one of the most pernicious attacks on our financial system and investing system. That's where your broker sells you out when you first place an order, right? He sells your order to a market maker, Citadel, Susquehanna, Jane Street type people. They're glad to pay for your order flow because they're going to go ahead and steal from you on your way in and on your way out of the markets. Ponzi schemes have been around a long time, and the Federal Reserve has really mastered the art of it. But in the end, it's a Ponzi scheme and it will break. So yeah, neither federal nor a reserve. The Fed was founded in 1913. I encourage everyone to read the Creature from Jekyll Island. It lays out how the bankers sent down representatives. They were so afraid of being discovered for what they were up to that they didn't even attend themselves. They sent down representatives. They did it in the dark of night. They hid out on Jekyll Island, and they concocted a methodology to fund a war, forever wars. And of course, 1913, the founding of the Fed. 1914, guess what? World War I, right? So yeah, no coincidence. The Federal Reserve is an instrument of state control. It's an instrument of forever wars. And go figure, we've been in forever wars now, and funding them through the Federal Reserve and through the printing of our money, which is another way of saying we're debasing your money, right? And every time money is printed, your money becomes less valuable. Now, we've been able to export a lot of that inflation overseas, but certainly we've taken a lot of inflation here in the United States. Just to put things in perspective, in 1913 terms, I think gold was, I don't know, $15, $20 an ounce. Today, we're at $3,650 an ounce, somewhere in those likings. Yeah, so that's about 99.5% of your money's been debased since the founding of the Fed. And yeah, at the pace we're going right now, let's just call money creation somewhere in the 7% range. Every 10 years, you lose 50% of your purchasing power. Now, I'll argue it's a lot worse than that, but either way, it's bad.
Yeah. Man, that's some intense stuff right there. And also, I just saw a few people repost the stream down here in the chat. I guess it tells us if they reposted. So really appreciate everyone who is reposting the stream. If you're on X, please do repost if you haven't already. And if you're on X or if you're on YouTube, leave a like and subscribe. And I believe I tagged Darkside and Darkside's media channel as well. So you're going to want to make sure you're following both if you like Bitcoin content. I guess this is slightly zoomed out. For kind of like realistic advice for the non-made it folks. You know, they're like, okay, I got an opportunity here. Money's flowing. I'm paying attention to stuff. Should I be borrowing assets? What, like the previous world, so many people made it by harnessing the system and the various processes that they created for people to make crazy amounts of money and stuff. For people in 2025, is your general advice just like, hey, maybe it's better to get a normal job, just saving Bitcoin, and it really doesn't need to get more complicated than that? Or do you have other things that come to mind?
Yeah, it's a great question, because in 2025, the system's completely broken, right? If you're a Gen Zer, young millennial, you're kind of screwed, right? The ability to afford a home, the ability to even save money, it's really hard. I mean, when your rent expense is as high as it is, food expense is as high as it is, how do you get ahead? Now, look, like, you use the Brady Bunch as an example, right? A TV show from the 70s. I was a father of 6. He worked, I think he was an architect, what doesn't really matter, carpenter, it didn't matter. You were able to afford a car, a home, a family vacation, and save money. Today, Could you imagine a family of 6 being supported by an architect or a carpenter? I mean, there's no chance. So this is the result of this debt-based fiat Ponzi scheme. We have inflated away the American dream. And that's why I think we're closer to the end of the Ponzi scheme than the beginning, because this can't continue. And by the way, there's no way to stop it, right? My friend Simon Dixon does such a great analogy. I'd love to share it with you. But imagine Kate and I started today a fiat-based money system. And we start by creating $1,000. But of course, our fiat-based money system is based on me creating a loan. So I loan Kate $1,000, and we agree to a 10% interest rate over 1 year. That means a year from now, he needs to pay me $1,100. But the issue is that we only have $1,000 in our monetary system. So he can't possibly pay me back $1,100 because the extra 100 doesn't exist. So the only way that money can exist is if I go out and create another loan. So I go to Kate's friend and I issue another $1,000 loan at 10%. Well, now there's $2,000 in the system. Kate can afford me to pay can afford to pay me back the $1,100, but his friend requires me to make another loan for me to be able to pay, for him to have the money to pay back my loan, right? So you can see where this goes.
Wow.
The idea that we're ever going to pay down debt is ludicrous. If you pay down debt, the money doesn't exist to pay the interest on the existing loans. So the only way the system can possibly go forward is to create more and more loans. Well, that's what's happened. But now that number's now gone, geometric, like it's out of control.
Yeah.
So it's important to understand that this is a Ponzi scheme, right? The only way to pay back the debt on an existing loan is to create new loans. And we have banks now that are able to basically coin our money, for lack of a better term. But the banks have a 0% reserve requirement. I think Basel III is 3 or 4%. So they don't have the money. When you walk into the bank and you get a mortgage, they print that money out of thin air, right? It's just pure money creation, and it's money creation to buy assets. And banks like to create loans that are asset-backed, that have some form of collateral. So even the bank money creation that we see is going towards non-productive means. If you go to the bank and say, I want to start a business, I want to hire 5 people, we're going to start a pizza shop in our local town, they're not going to write you a loan, even though that's the type of loan that would actually benefit society because it would be productive, it would create jobs. No, instead, the 2 types of credit creation banks enjoy, asset-backed loans, that just causes the price of assets to go up, and then consumer loans, and that causes the price of goods to go up. So we have every facet of our economy. The way the system was built is now at its breaking point because people can't afford things, right? And when you can't afford things, what's the point of working? So we're reaching a really, really tough spot. Now, like from my and going back to 2019, when I had my realization that Bitcoin fixes this, it's because guess what? Bitcoin fixes this. If you go to a deflationary currency like Bitcoin, then the value of the money increases every year. Not the value of the goods or the price of the goods increasing, but the value of the money increases.
Someone said this was a bad thing though for a money. They were like, this isn't like good because if it's always more, then you'll never spend it. And I was like, I guess, but wouldn't they just create a way for you to spend it? Like, aren't there apps right now that you can do this with Bitcoin? Like, I know people right now who don't have fiat.
Well, it's such a misleading point of view. Look, if you believe that in order for society to flourish, you need credit creation, okay, you have that opinion. I don't, right? First of all, in a Bitcoin world, loans would be made out of love, right? Grandfathers would loan their grandson money or granddaughter money to go out and start a business, not for interest, right? Just to get their Bitcoin back out of love, right? We don't need a usury-based system to create growth, right? What I would argue with you, yes, we've had tremendous technological innovation that's come from printing massive amounts of money, but ask yourself, is that technological innovation really been good for society? I'm up here in northern Montana. We have a pretty nice sized Amish community up here. They care less about your technology innovations, and they live such happy lives, right? They're really, I mean, when you interact in the Amish community, you realize just how happy a people they are. The kids are happy. Um, they're much healthier because they're not eating the
I believe
processed.
that.
They eat only organic wheats. They make their bread. They make their food themselves. They grow their own food. They don't spray it with pesticides and cancer-causing agents. So, look, as much as I understand the argument for unlimited credit creation, I don't think it makes for a healthier society.
Do you think it's possible? Because that's the other objection I've heard is they're like, Dark, that's great. There's no way it's going to happen. I think you probably know a few people that come to mind with that type of, attitude toward it. But what are your thoughts with that?
Yeah, look, I can understand the normalcy bias that we've lived in this credit creation society basically 50 years, right? Since 1971, when we came off the gold standard, and even before that, right? We were cheating and coming off the gold standard. But um, look, things are going to change. I think Gen Z today, I think they appreciate the fact that inflation kills things, right? It's killed their dream. And I think that people long for a healthier lifestyle, for a land of abundance over a land of infinite scrolling on your phone. So interestingly enough, I moved up here to northern Montana to kind of get away from all of the insanity. And this is a land of tremendous abundance. We have more food than we could ever use. We have more cows than people. People are much happier here, right? It's a much simpler life than living in the city. And I'll be heading back to Vegas soon, where I try to spend my winters. But it's a different life up here. There's a much higher value on spirituality. I just think you can't compare kind of urban modern lifestyle to what goes on when you get out of the inner city and go to a more rural area and people treat each other better. Everyone's happier. I don't know how else to put it to you, but look, I understand why the modern lawyer class and political class can't even envision what I'm explaining. But the people, right? If you get to the people, right, they want a simpler life. They want a better life, right? They want to be able to raise children, and they can't because it's too expensive. Bitcoin fixes this.
I mean, that's basically the reason I dumped such an irrational amount of my net worth into Bitcoin over the last year. It's just increased over and over every few months. It's just, I basically just been like, okay, I just need more every month. And so it doesn't matter if I can just be confident that I'll get paid every week. Don't lose my job at Wolf, and I'll just keep DCing and forget the rest, because it's not worth the opportunity cost. Like, I've built my whole last 6 years based off opportunity cost bias, which is every time I get money, I would spend it, but in a way that would boost me, whether I was going to a conference to meet more people or whatever it is. I kept every time I would get it. And then eventually I was like, okay, I've built up some level of foundation in the game online in this world that I can go ahead and start to stack and start to build. But you're right. It took literally like a year and a half of paying off debt first, and then building that skill set up. And then instead of paying off debt, I was funneling the money to a savings account. And then once the savings account was ready to go, I was like, okay, now it's an investing account. And it took forever to build it up. And I remember just being like, man, it is literally impossible to get ahead. And I just, so hard.
It's funny you say that, because from 2019 to 2024, Mrs. Lightside and myself, we lived in an RV. And one of the things about the RV lifestyle that's so interesting is if you buy something, you have to throw something out, right? There's just no room.
Yeah, of course, right.
When you live that lifestyle and you're able to sort of simplify needs, right? There's a big difference between needs and wants. I think that's one of the mal-incentives of fiat money printing is needs. Wants feel like needs, right? But yeah, if you're able to simplify your life, you realize you really don't need much, right? You need food, you need a couple pair of clothes, you need 2 pair of shoes, and then life becomes rather simple, right? And you don't find yourself in the made out of plastic, made in China trap, right? And you just don't need all the crap that you think you need. So look, I think we'd be a much happier society if we appealed to our needs, we let go of our wants, and we treat each other with love and respect.
Yeah, you know what? When you had first introduced the concept, you said, Bitcoin-backed loans will be backed by love. I could immediately feel from people watching. They're like, "What is that even? How's it even? What? Like, what? That can't be possible." But it does make sense. Like when you explain it, you're like, "No. These aren't bank loans. Like it's not some dude in a suit that you don't know that's preying on you and saying, 'Oh, of course, yeah, come on over.'" It's not like that at all. And I was like, "That does make sense." And I love that. And also, one thing I've learned through the last year through Bitcoin, a little bit, making a little bit more money, but also just it was the conversation around stores of wealth, where you put your money so it doesn't get wrecked over time. And I was looking at, picking up my first, not like a super expensive watch or anything, but I was like, I wanted to get some kind of watch that looked nice. And once I got it, I was like, oh wow, this is like a portion of my net worth visible on my wrist. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. But it got me thinking. I was like, wait, this is like collateral. I could, if I needed to get to the other side of the world and some dude, I didn't have money or I had nothing on me. I could just give him this watch, be like, this is worth some money. It'll probably cover whatever this costs. Like, I need your help right now. And I was like, that's a very practical use case of money. But I was only able to think about it like that. Like once I was able to get out of this, just like constant turmoil of just trying to get ahead. And that's kind of why the crux of why I asked, like, what is your message for people to get ahead here in this kind of market? I think there are opportunities everywhere. I think even in some ways people are too pessimistic, because I feel like so many opportunities are available. It's kind of ridiculous that I think part of it might just be pure discipline in getting your name out there and shooting some DMs out and stuff like that. I'm not sure if you've seen opportunities in the Bitcoin space, but like I know from DMs, because, with Wolf Bitcoin, we do so many spaces, people are looking for opportunities in the market. And I've always just been like, yeah, like for me, it's always been media. And so you make media in a world where there's a lot of attention. And for me, that ended up being this space. But do you have any advice for people? You came from trading, but you're also an entrepreneur, CEO, and founder. So there's like a whole other aspect that people may not know as much about because you speak so much about Bitcoin.
That's a great question. Look, I think there's never been more opportunity for young people than there is today. But that being said, I'll also say it's never been harder for young people than it's been today. So, look, not everybody has the same talents, right? Not everybody enjoys founding a company or trying to build things. There are people with tremendous talents in art, in music. The bottom line is that until we fix the money, the only talent that will be recognized is the ability to hustle, right? The ability to go faster and make money, and that's a shame, right? If we can just go back into history, the Dark Ages, which were a terrible time, let's talk about uh, 800 to 1200. They ended by Florence and the Medici family creating the florin, which was a gold coin, a standard weight and measure that was used throughout Europe. And when they went on a hard money standard, there was abundance. I'm not saying it was perfect, but the arts flourished, music flourished, the food was better. Like everything got better in society when they adopted a hard money standard. There was still hard money lending, right? The Medici family would make loans. They owned the Bank of Medici in Florence, but just the concept of using hard money solved so many of the ills that had plagued their society for hundreds of years. And I just feel like there's such a parallel to the Medici times to today. It just feels to me like as great as AI may be, and maybe it is great, to me it's not great. I mean, I enjoy using it to be able to answer questions.
Yeah, like
But the
Google
thought of
almost.
the thought of replacing millions of jobs with robots and robotics and AI, that sounds like a really bad idea, right? I just, from a societal standpoint, I don't see how we're sitting around clapping like seals when a bunch of technocrats come along and say we can replace you. We have a AI. Like that just sounds absolutely stupid to me. And I think to myself, well, what would have happened if, let's just go back 100 years, right? If they would have come along and said, hey, there's this computer at this data center down the street, and it's going to take all your jobs. Well, the town residents would have gone down and burned down the data center, right? Like, there's no way that would have been okay. But today, because everything's broken, we're clapping like seals. I don't know how to explain it. All I can say is the money's broken. Fix the money, you'll fix society in a really big way.
Do you think whoever is behind whoever is so bullish around stablecoins at the very top who's pulling strings, for whatever reason, they've chosen stablecoins to solve problems. That's what the government, that's what all the big people are seeing on TV that I'm seeing. So I guess my question becomes two, because one, my first question is kind of like a bit more of like a electric question of like, if they invited you on their show, what would you say? Would you take the opportunity, kind of loose cannon it? Would you try and educate in a gentle way, like the CNBCs, the Fox, like these guys that bring on Tom Lee and all these people to talk about all these things that are going on? I was curious what you would say, and then also, yeah, just general thoughts on that.
Yeah, great question. Look, stablecoins are a Hail Mary pass by the US government to fund itself because they can't find buyers of their debt. The way we're going, Tether will be the fourth largest owner of US debt. Stablecoins are neither stable nor are they a good idea. And I'll tell you why. Stablecoins will, because of their nature, because they move on crypto rails and not through the SWIFT system, they will change the dynamics of the US dollar throughout the entire world. And what do I mean by that? Let's just use a country like Egypt. Egypt is suffering from 50% inflation. They have extremely tight capital controls. I think if you get caught with Bitcoin in Egypt, you go to jail for 3 years. They're doing everything in their power to save their own currency. And along comes a stable coin, which can now be transferred to anybody with an iPhone. And of course, if you're in Egypt, you're going to try to get your hands on stable coins. You're not going to care about the local currency. So what happens to the local currency? Well, it hyperinflates away. It's done. That causes the local regime in Egypt to become extremely violent on its people because they've lost their ability to print money. So they're now left with nothing but violence. And what have we done? Again, the US, by increasing dollar dominance throughout the world, is going to create tremendous instability. So is that a good thing? Well, it's a good thing, I guess, if you're the Federal Reserve and the banksters, because you're able to fund your debt. But it's a bad thing if you live elsewhere in the world. And I would ask you this question, Cade. Are stable coins going to create more North Koreas? I suspect they are.
Probably.
That's not a good thing. But if I was a third world despot and I wanted to protect my currency, well, the first thing I would do is shut off the internet to all my people so that they can't get stable coins.
Wow.
I mean, again,
Wow.
you know, the U.S. has a long history of kind of messing around in the world, and then, you know, we figure out what to do next. I have a feeling stable coins are going to create a lot of instability. And I also find it really funny that they call them stable coins, right? Like, it always seems to me, we had the Inflation Reduction Act caused a ton of inflation. Stable coins, right, going to cause instability. The Genius Act, anything but smart. Everything's always backwards, right? Just reverse it. So when they tell you they're a stable coin, realize they're creating instability.
Yeah, so I had seen Simon Dixon, and the reason I brought it up was because Simon Dixon had posted like a long thread, and he was like, he basically referred to a post back in like February or something. And it was a post saying, hey, Europe is cooked, the stablecoins are coming, and they will all turn into, you know, the central bank digital currency. We're all done for. Saving Bitcoin. That was kind of the gist of the thread. But in that thread, he was pretty confident that stablecoins, no matter what we do or say, are going to be that rail that they end up using. And so his take was more so like, yeah, you're not going to be doing anything about it. I'm just laying out what's going to happen. The only thing you can really do is custody your Bitcoin, and you'll probably be better off than the next guy. But there's nothing else we can really do because they're going to make it happen.
Yeah, look, he's 100% right. I'm a huge Simon Dixon fan. The good news about stable coins is that it gets you one click away from Bitcoin, right? Like, if there's any one positive, as you know, you can go from stable coin to Bitcoin with a tap of the mouse or a click of the finger. But they're going to create instability. And, you know, Europe, since we brought it up, Europe's a hot mess, right? They have all kinds of problems, not just financial. They have societal problems with mass immigration, all the different things. And I think the next financial crisis will come out of Europe, potentially Japan, but more likely out of Europe. And that will spread to our shores in hours.
Hours. Wait,
yes.
is that how it works? What I don't even know.
So look, as I mentioned earlier, UBS can't fail without Goldman Sachs failing, right? And that's why a major European financial crisis spreads here in minutes, right? Because once their banks are in trouble, there's only one person that can bail out the European Union, and that's the Federal Reserve. And just imagine what would go on here in the United States if we found out we were bailing out Europe at a very time that they're
Oh
cracking
my
down.
gosh.
That's just not going to fly.
Wow.
Americans aren't going to put up with that. So there's not the political will in the United States to bail out a European bank, nor less to bail out all of Europe and all of Japan, right? All of these malaligned incentives that have developed over the course of years are going to come home to roost. And the United States is not going to be in a position with our current financial situation and our debt to take on, 50 trillion more dollars in debt to bail out Europe. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. Man. Okay. So this gets me thinking. So I had to put up a.
Wait, kid, now you know why I'm Dark Side of the Moon, right?
No, yeah. And by the way, is there like merch? Like I said, now you're wearing you've got the media account. Now you've got the hat. Like, is this merch that people can buy?
This is the Pink Floyd hat, Dark Side of the Moon.
Yep,
for all you youngins out there, go out and buy this album.
I listened to it because I saw the album pop up on a TikTok video after you had made this. I went and it popped up on TikTok, and I was like, oh, and I was like, oh, wow. Okay, now I get it.
Yeah, so I was a huge Pink Floyd fan growing up, and for any of you who don't know, Roger Waters and David Gilmour, amazing individuals. Roger Waters, extremely, I don't even know. I mean, some would call him a wild liberal. Others would call him, center of the road. He's been against violence forever. I'm a huge fan. I wonder if Roger Waters owns any Bitcoin. I mean, that'd be funny. But no, Pink Floyd as a band, incredibly influential in my life. Just complete counterculture, and stand for doing the right thing.
Yeah, I love that. Switching gears a little bit because I can't not ask the question, even though I know you're gonna groan. So Josh Mandel's just been on a tear, Saylor, MSTR, the whole thing. That's the only thing anyone's talking about. You went, and I don't think if you kicked it off, because I don't know if this whole thing's your fault or whose fault this is exactly, but someone went on the MSTR, Saylor's got to change his plan. This is not going to work. And I don't remember if that was like already adding fuel to the fire or if that was kind of what kicked it off. But all I know is that was happening. And then Josh pours a ton of gas in the fire. Yeah. Next thing you know, MSTR is dropping. Everyone's tweeting at him. Give me a bit of a time frame, I guess, if you have any, on like how important it is that Saylor sees the message and acknowledges it for what it really is. Because you put out a full direct message I saw on Twitter where you put out a full message. You say, this post is so that you can see it. And it was clear as day. You meant for him to see that post.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm a huge fan of Saylor. Well, let's just start there, right? Yeah. He's a pioneer. He's like he's the Vespucci of modern times. He's out there. He's the explorer out in front of the Bitcoin movement. That being said, from a purely Wall Street perspective, I understood Saylor and Strategy as being this amazing company that had created a flywheel, a speculative attack on the US dollar. And he did so by issuing convertible debt, which and in many cases was a zero coupon, meaning no obligation to pay any interest. And he went ahead and took that money and bought Bitcoin, and everybody benefited because the debt was convertible at much higher prices. So from a shareholder's perspective, you were being diluted, but you were being diluted at a much higher price, and you were buying Bitcoin today. And that went on for a period of years and years. And then all of a sudden, in the early part of this year, he switched gears and went to these perpetual preferreds, essentially a direct speculative attack on the U.S. bond market, on the money market funds with STRC, the high yield market with STRD. Okay, so now we get into a position where we're going to directly attack Wall Street at its absolute core, which is the bond market. Well, the empire strikes back, as we know. I think Wall Street was great with Saylor when he was doing his convertible bond thing and growing his company, but start attacking their core products, and now it's a different story. So where are we at? Well, now he has about $600 million in obligations, dividends, and interest payments, and the company really doesn't make any money. The software company, I think, is about break even, maybe makes a few bucks, maybe loses a few, I'm not sure. But ultimately, the only way he can meet those fiat obligations the dividend payments and the interest payments is to go ahead and sell his common stock. So is that a flywheel, right? I would say no. It's a negative feedback loop if you're a common shareholder. But if you're a common shareholder, you're not benefiting from the purchase of the Bitcoin if he's continually bashing the common stock to make the obligations and then continually bashing the common stock to buy more Bitcoin. Now, all that being said, this is a very short-term discussion we're having because over the long term, Bitcoin's going to go up and strategy stock's going to go up with it because they own so much Bitcoin. So where do I stand on this? Look, I would like to see him sell a very small amount of Bitcoin to pay the fiat obligations and not continually sell the common stock. However, Saylor, being the largest shareholder, the largest common shareholder, feels otherwise. He feels, I don't care if my common stock goes down in the short term because I'm a long-term holder and I'm going to benefit from anything that's accretive, right? And right now, with the common stock trading above book value or above MNAV, above a 1 MNAV, it's accretive. The problem is that in the short term, the common shareholders are getting beat, right? They'll be better off holding IBIT than they are holding MSTR if MSTR is going to go down to a 1 MNAV. So
and is he selling the next thing to that same crowd of people as well? If he's like, hey, I'm selling the common stock on you, and I'm going to ask you to buy my next, whatever instruments for debt. Is that what's happening as well?
Well, the debt instruments are benefiting from this, right? They don't care if he sells the common stock. They just want to get their dividends, right? So the debt instruments could care less. They just want to make sure that the amount of Bitcoin that backs up their debt exists. That's all. I mean, from a debt buyer, you only care about the assets that underlie your debt. You never care about the common shareholder. So that thus is the problem, right? I think the flywheel's broken. I think the way you fix the flywheel is you sell a little bit of Bitcoin and you pay off the dividends. And that way, as long as the CAGR of Bitcoin is greater than the interest rate you're paying or dividends that you're paying via an implied interest rate, then you win, right? And that's a natural flywheel. Right now, we're stuck in a negative feedback loop. How long that lasts, I'm not sure, but I don't see any way out of it given the current strategy.
Yeah, because the only way would be if Bitcoin's sent tomorrow, it goes to 200K. Does this kind of go out the window? Because it's like, well, I guess we're going to outrun everything no matter what.
Well, does it go out the window? No, but its number go up. But I'm not sure the number goes up at the same pace as Bitcoin. So, right, in order for the strategy to really make sense, it has to outperform Bitcoin. And it's hard to outperform Bitcoin when you're constantly selling your common stock.
That's a good point. Sorry about that. Wow. Jeez. Yeah, that's that goes into my next question, which is really just on 21 from Jack Mallers and Tether. You referenced Tether a minute ago or a few minutes ago. Definitely going to be one of the bigger players, partnering with Jack Mallers, one of the top OGs. Either this is the biggest co-op of all time, and Jack doesn't know it. And I've heard people say that before, that Saylor and Jack may not know it, but maybe they're being played. And maybe that's why, who knows? I have no idea. That's pure speculation. But thoughts on this? And also, is there any scenario where it makes sense to bother playing in these games versus just buying Bitcoin? I mean, is there any scenario where you're like, it can make sense, let's hop in MSTY. There's obviously so many of those that popped up. Well, I feel like I maybe know your answer, but I still want to ask. So,
okay, it's a great question. I don't think the upside in the expansion of multiple is great enough to get me to buy a stock as opposed to owning Bitcoin in self-custody. And I'll tell you why. In a financial crisis, as we talked about earlier, what's going to happen? These companies are essentially fiat investments on fiat rails. So when you sell your MicroStrategy, what do you get back? You don't get Bitcoin. You get dollars. So in a crisis, and let's say they need to devalue the US dollar, okay? At the very moment when you want to have Bitcoin, the government is going to buy these companies, right? They're just going to buy them, and you're going to get back fiat dollars when you need them least, right? And you're not going to be able to buy Bitcoin, right? In a crisis, they're going to shut off the buy button. So you're going to get back dollars and you're going to want Bitcoin, but you're not going to be able to get it. That's how this will play out. I mean, it's unfortunate, but we have a long history to look at to understand that when governments are in trouble, they act to save themselves, right? And they will say it's in the common good to do so. And it probably will be in the common good to do so. So only people that hold Bitcoin in self-custody will be the winners. Everybody that holds fiat investments will get back fiat when they want it the least.
That's a powerful statement. They get back fiat when they need it the least. Yeah, I mean, that's basically getting screwed in a nutshell right there. I mean, wow. Okay, so it's getting me thinking with self-custody. Who are like the top? Someone had referenced Terrence. I've been on a call with like Cosmo and a couple of those guys for self-custody. But for people who are watching, if they're like, okay, you know what? I need a custody at least 5%, 10%, hopefully, as much, hopefully as high as 100. But, as much as they're self-custodying, do you have any tips for people to go to or places, resources, things like that?
Sure. You can reach out to Terrence. But I would recommend everybody start at BTC Sessions, at BTC Sessions. Okay. His account is, he has a YouTube channel too, where he walks through, I mean, there's got to be, I don't know, 1,000 hours. I don't know. He's got more content on there on self-custody, different wallets, different hardware wallets, different concepts, different ideas. No two people have the same exact idea. If you're talking about larger amounts of money, I would recommend a service like Unchained. They're not a custodial, so it's non-custodial, but they do assist you in setting up multi-sig wallets, and they provide a level of security because they hold one key. It's a 2 of 3 keys. There's no single solution that's right for everybody. For me, I care a lot about chain of custody and the ability in the uneventful case of me dying, and at some point I will die, that Bitcoin flows down to my family. So I've set up a methodology that works inside of a trust. But everybody needs to really do what's best for them. I would start at BTC Sessions. There are people like Terrence out there that do an amazing job. They'll talk to you. They'll help you. They do it out of the goodness of their heart. So huge fan.
That's awesome. That is awesome. You had mentioned your family there. For someone who had spent their whole life killing it, making money on Wall Street, you share a different perspective than I've seen. You probably know exactly what I'm talking about. Most people are not like this. They're not talking about love. They're not talking about Bitcoin. They're definitely not talking about getting off the debt system. That's definitely not what they're talking about 99% of the time. And so I'm curious on what kind of lessons you took from that, and also were passing down to your friends and family, your children, and things like that you found to be the biggest things that you've learned throughout your life, and things you've carried along the way.
Yeah, it's a great question. You might have picked up earlier when I said I did a 25-year sentence on Wall Street, because it was a sentence. The money was great, but I gave up a lot, right? I gave up seeing my kids growing up in many respects. I traveled back and forth between Chicago and New York. I commuted. And to be honest with you, I learned to really hate the very people that I worked with. I mean, they were some of the worst people in the world. And generally speaking, I think most people that have been involved in high corporate life, their friends don't come out of the company, right? They just don't. You leave a company, you leave your friends behind. I left Wall Street with a really bad taste in my mouth, right? I saw all of the criminality, and it's just, look, it is what it is, right? Like, Wall Street is an organism. It's a very unhealthy place. People will screw anybody to get anything. That's the perspective they bring, right? Like, it's all about the money. Everything's about the money. And I just, look, when I was really young, I left college after about a week or two, and I went on tour. Yeah, I went on tour with the Grateful Dead. Just a deadhead. Right. And I really fell into that peace love culture, right? Of sort of a hippie culture. And the people I met on Dead Tour are still friends today, right? But the people I met on Wall Street, I could care less about. And that's just a fact, right? So look, it's all about, at the end of the game, when you get to be my age, you look back on it and you're like, okay, what were the experiences that meant so much to me? Where did I really learn about, life, and about spirituality, about, all of the positives that have, played such an important role in my life. And it's not from Wall Street, right?
Mm,
It wasn't from corporate activity or greed. It was from giving back. And that's why I do what I do now, right? It's all for me. It's 100% about giving back to the community, and they hate it. By the way, I mean the wars that I've had, and
indeed.
I've only been doing this for 10 months now, right? Like I just started, and the amount of fire that I take from sort of the what I'll call the ivory tower community, the people that only care about number go up, the very people that live in Chicago and they're telling us how great everything is as their city, as 30 people get shot on an average weekend. Um,
Jeez.
like I can't live in that world. Like I just can't do it. I care too much about people, right? Like I want to give back not just here to the Bitcoin community, but inside my community, right? I want to support local charities. I want to get to know people. It's just who I am. I've always been a populist. I've always cared about people. Um, I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, I never coming out of Wall Street, I knew what I wanted to do, which was I wanted to get involved in helping people and being a better person, being a better father, right? Those are the things that mattered to me.
That is so beautiful. I love, and I appreciate you sharing that. And it's a perfect segue for this before we wrap to plug. It's really not going to load. Okay, Darkside Media, which by the way, I don't know if it's in your bio, Dark, but if it's not, it should definitely be tagged in there. But you definitely, if you go to Darkside's page, if you're on X, just go right above our faces. Darkside and Darkside Media are both tagged, so you can follow that. And there's videos coming out in media and stuff. But could you take a second for the people who don't know or they're not aware? Maybe they saw a couple posts, they weren't sure. Maybe they saw a funny edit. What is Darkside Media? What are you trying to do with that?
Yeah, just trying to look. Not everybody is the same. I can do spaces all day, and I'm not going to reach a certain audience, right? And I want to make sure that this message gets across to all audiences. And I think video is really important, especially shorts. So we've been doing all kinds of shorts. I do like quick short. Some of it might be actually cut out of spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it might be cut out of a live stream like this. Others I'll just sit down in front of the camera and record. Something about the great taking or something about Bitcoin or something, whatever the flavor of the day is. We're also doing some comedy things. I'm sure you saw Bitcoin versus Solana, Bitcoin versus Ethereum, some funny stuff. Hopefully we're going to expand it and start a YouTube channel and do some podcasting. I just want to reach as big an audience as possible since I'm giving a lot of my time to this effort. As you know, you hear me all the time, right? Like, so I view this not as a job, but as a passion of love to give back to the community. And I want to make sure that my message of hope, experience, strength, and hope gets across to as many people as possible. And Darkside Media is going to give us the opportunity to reach out and touch people that they're not in spaces, they're not on X, they may not be experts in Bitcoin. So hopefully we'll get on Instagram or on TikTok, on YouTube.
No, hopefully this has to happen. I don't know who has to get involved, but this has to happen because it just needs to happen. That is a great idea. And by the way, because I also have found some passion in talking about Bitcoin. Obviously, the last few months I've become more of a Bitcoiner the last year. So I've put out some content, but there's a difference when a 27-year-old kid puts out content because he's learning about something and he can put it in a nice way versus someone who spent their career in a field and you're like, no, I know something. There's some real value here. It's a different type of content. And that's why I was like so excited when you put that out because there's not many people who are willing to do it. They're busy. They're doing other shit. They're just like, no, I gotta build 6 businesses over here. I got 6 meetings. I'm already late for all of them kind of thing. And you're like, no. I want to do this because it's important. This content's out there. So genuinely, that's like the biggest thing I found for Bitcoin and crypto, the biggest difference. And it got to a point where it was so not that all crypto is terrible and the people in crypto are terrible. It's not what I'm saying, but there's such a difference between Bitcoin and the crypto world. It became unignorable, and that's when we had to separate the brands. And one thing I've noticed with Bitcoin is that people are willing to help. They want to help you. Some guy came in and was like, "Hey, I'm in the Bitcoin mining world." He came into our space. I don't really want to shill. I just want to give like 2 sentences of what I do, just so you guys know who I am. Like 5 minutes later, like 4 of the people on our panel connected, and then he like came to our space the next week, and now he's a regular. And that's why I just really, really fell in love with Bitcoin because of that communal aspect. I found it in crypto, but it was always it was always like until they need to sell, and then it just gets all toxic. And I was like, there's something missing from this industry. And that's when I finally found myself to Bitcoin. So
No, look, you're hitting the nail right on the head, right? Like as I mentioned earlier, Bitcoin is a love language, right? The more you understand it, the more you realize what a better system we would have if we were hyper Bitcoinized, right? If we didn't have the Fed printing money, if we didn't have inflation, if we didn't have the banks and the usury and all of the things that go along with what's become a hyper financialized society. I mean, we could go on for hours discussing that subject earlier. We talked about money creation through banking. But all of the incentives in today's society are wrong, right? We don't incentivize families. We don't incentivize love. We don't incentivize, happy and better society for young people. We don't incentivize healthy food. We don't incentivize all of the things that we need to really grow and flourish as a society. And I think once people get Bitcoin, they really understand it deep. Then it becomes a language of love, a language of peace. Bitcoin demonetizes violence, right? It's not confiscatable the way gold and silver are. There's so much we could talk about. Kate, thank you so much for having me, man. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, so I went over a couple of minutes, but I really appreciate you coming on, Dark. And for everyone out there, please give Darkside Media a follow and Darkside as well. And I'm sure you have to bounce to another show or something like that. So Dark, again, really appreciate you coming on. And hopefully people learned. We'll catch you guys all in the next stream or space, everybody. Take care. You'll find Dark on Spaces probably tomorrow morning at 11:30 on Bitcoin today, right?
Bitcoin today, yeah, 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 11:30 Eastern. Should be a good time. Come and listen. Give us a holler.
Right on. All right, guys. We'll catch you guys all the next one. Take care. Give them a follow. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.